As the British liberated Bergen-Belsen, the soldiers were greeted with a scene of pure depravity and horror. 60,000 prisoners had been left for dead by the SS guards, many of whom had simply fled the concentration camp in fear of being captured by the advancing army. It was clear that horrific war crimes had been carried out at Belsen, and after the clean-up of the camp had occurred, there was a call for the perpetrators to be brought to justice and to face their fate. The Belsen Trials aimed to secure justice for the victims, and a number of those on trial were sentenced to death for their crimes of the Holocaust. One of those was Franz Stofel, a rather high-ranking member of the SS. So join us today as we look at the justified execution of Franz Stofel, the evil monster of Belsen. And remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Franz Stofel, or Stofel, was born on the 5th of October 1915 in Bavaria. Before the Second World War he worked as a clerk, before joining the German army in October 1934. At the time Hitler had seized control of Germany, and the Führer sought to secure himself a huge European empire, so to do this he greatly expanded the German military, and Stofel originally signed up for the army, however instead within a year had transitioned from the Wehrmacht to the SS. He wanted to become a professional soldier, and the SS gave him the opportunity to do this. Within the SS he was assigned to the SS Totenkopfverbände, a group which was responsible for the organisation and administration of the Nazi concentration camps in Germany. The SSTV, as it was known, was created in 1933, however it ran the largest of the concentration camps such as Dachau and Bergen-Belsen in Germany, and in Nazi-occupied territory such as Auschwitz-Birkenau in Poland and Mauthausen in Austria. They oversaw the death camps and dealt with the genocide in secrecy, even establishing extermination camps, places just to execute innocent people in quick fashion. The group were known in particular for facilitating the Holocaust and the final solution, and were responsible for the deaths of millions. Franz Stofel was assigned to the group and was to work at Dachau, and from March 1939 to January 1944 he was in charge of a small work detailing group, overseeing tasks inside of the warehouses. His work was noted in this role, and he was then in 1944 transferred to Mittelbau-Dora, working as a Kommandführer or detachment commander for the creation of a new camp in Kleinbedungen. He then oversaw the camp and led it from October 1944 to early April 1945. Inside of the subcamp were around 620 foreign prisoners who were forced to work in Mittelwerk, which at the time was responsible for constructing one of Hitler's wonder weapons, the V-2 rocket. Stofel oversaw the production and the work inside of the facility. On the 4th of April 1945, Stofel was ordered to evacuate Kleinbedungen by Franz Hosler as the United States Ninth Army were advancing towards Mittelbau-Dora. To evacuate the prisoners a force march was ordered, and it was Stofel and his deputy, Wilhelm Dürr, who oversaw this along with 45 SS men. The group would walk to the nearest town of Herzberg to be then evacuated by rail. Stofel said at his trial a roll call was first taken. There were 610 prisoners in good physical condition and 44 guards. I motorcycled to Herzberg and in view of the air raids prepared accommodation for my prisoners at a camp. Dürr and myself went to Herzberg, but my motorcycle was destroyed in another air raid, and I ordered the transport to march to Bergen-Belsen. They stopped her a number of times on the journey to Bergen-Belsen, but the conditions of the death march were horrific. With very few rations and very little food, the over 600 prisoners were forced to march 25 to 30 kilometres a day with very few resources. Many of the prisoners had sore feet, and many had to even walk in wooden shoes, and they were walking for 10 hours straight a day. On the march, a number of prisoners who were too slow or attempting to escape were shot dead by Stofel and his guards. Overall, around 30 prisoners did not make the journey to Belsen, with a number being killed, such was the harsh conditions, or being shot by the SS guards or Stofel's assistant Dürr, but a few did manage to escape. Stofel's death march to Bergen-Belsen was horrific, with the conditions being terrible, a lack of food and also brutal punishment occurring. At this time in the war, many groups of prisoners were being marched to camps within Germany, as the Allies in the Red Army pushed the Germans back towards their homeland. The result of this was Bergen-Belsen became incredibly overcrowded. At the time in the war, Belsen and the conditions inside it were deteriorating incredibly quickly, and disease was rife. TB, typhus and typhoid fever were very common, and hundreds of people were dying from disease each day, and it was estimated that over 10,000 prisoners died within a few months at Belsen from diseases. Amongst these were Anne Frank and her sister Margot, but the number of prisoners at Belsen continued to grow. On the 11th of April 1945, Heinrich Himmler negotiated a treaty with the Allies to agree to have the camp handed over without a fight. Now many of the SS guards had managed to escape and flee the Allies, running away from their crimes in an attempt to escape their fate. However, bizarrely at Bergen-Belsen, a small number of SS men and women were left to uphold law and order inside of the camp. Of those who remained, many were brutal guards who regularly beat and even murdered prisoners, including the camp commandant Josef Kramer, and infamous guards Johanna Bormann, Irma Grese, Franz Stofel and many more. At the Belsen Trials, accusations and evidence were levelled against these guards, and they were so severe that many were sentenced to death. Franz Stofel arrived at Bergen-Belsen 4 days before the camp was liberated, and as he was a member of the SS, he was detained and forced to bury the corpses once the camp was liberated. Those who died from diseases were just unburied with no dignity, but the British who liberated made the SS staff bury the bodies. Stofel was made to do this, and then he was arrested by the British military before ending up on trial. The Belsen Trials were held between the 17th of September and 17th of November 1945, with those guards arrested at the camp being brought to justice. Franz Stofel throughout his testimony tried to maintain his innocence. The evidence of the death march was put forward, with witnesses talking of the shootings that occurred and the horrendous conditions and the lack of food that prisoners were starved of. Franz Stofel, when he was questioned, confirmed that he had heard from the prisoners that several people in the transport had been shot, and he confirmed that Stofel had knowledge of this. However, he himself denied that he gave the order to fire. The fact these poor prisoners were forced to march 30 kilometres a day with no food or supplies was horrific, and was justification for the sentence that faced Stofel. For his crimes, Franz Stofel was indicted for the murder of the prisoners on the death march, and he was found personally responsible. For this he was sentenced to death and transferred to Hamelin prison to await his fate. His execution was to be performed on the 13th of December 1945, and along with the others sentenced to death in the Belsen Trials, Stofel was forced to wait in prison for the day he would meet his maker. At Hamelin, there were a line of cells where the condemned were kept, being guarded at all times, and at the end of the block of cells was the execution chamber. Here a simultaneous gallows was erected to perform 2 executions at once to speed up the process, and it was British executioner Albert Pierpoint who was to perform the proceedings. Pierpoint met with each of the condemned, including Stofel, and along with his assistant they calculated the weights and heights of the condemned. He did this in order to work out the length of the drop needed to kill Stofel and the condemned, immediately snapping their necks. Pierpoint was noted during the executions for his efficiency and success, and early in the morning of the 13th of December 1945, Stofel was waiting for his execution. The women who were condemned were to be executed first, and then the men. Stofel was taken into the execution chamber, flanked by 2 guards who were brought in from his cell. His identity was then confirmed, and after this he was led up the stairs of the gallows, where he came face to face with Pierpoint. Pierpoint then placed a hood over Stofel's head, before he was shuffled across to a chalk X which had been placed on the trapdoor of the gallows. Efficiently and quickly Pierpoint released the trapdoor, and then Stofel was executed in swift fashion. Franz Stofel was a barbaric man who wished greatly to join the SS to become a professional soldier. However, he ended up like so many participating in one of the worst genocides in history. He was known for the horrific death march he imposed on over 600 prisoners to escape the Allies. However, he eventually faced justice at the hangman's noose. There were so many men and women like Stofel who became involved in the Holocaust through different means. However, the one thing they have all in common is the fact they wish to inflict so much suffering onto innocent people. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.